What's up, everybody? Earlier on we did a tutorial on kind of just how to set up the ASP880 along with the iD14 by Audient. We figured it was probably a good time to go into just a little more advanced features of each of these and how you can really maximize the signal and the sound of what you're recording or whatever you're using it for. So we're going to go into a few more things on pretty much all these different buttons that are within the ASP880 and show you just kind of what you can do with them and how to make your signal and your sound just that much better with them, because it's an amazing piece of equipment and I think you'll want to be able to get the best out of it that you can. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to get into is this kind of array of buttons that you have on top of each input or a preamp for your ASP. You'll notice you have a 48 volt phantom power button. You just turn that on if you're trying to use a condenser microphone. Then you're going to have a pad. The reason you're going to use a pad is when you hit the button, it's going to lower your signal by about 10 dB. Reasons for this is, say you're recording a snare drum or like a very loud guitar amp or something, you're going to hit that pad just so you're not clipping at any point within your recording. Pads are just super useful for that reason. That's really all it does, is it just turns the signal down. So the next button we're going to go into is this button right next to the pad. Its symbol is a circle with a slash through it, and this is going to flip the phase of the incoming signal going into your ASP. And this can be super important for several different reasons. The main reason is when you're trying to kind of match up signals from two different microphones. A good example might be if you're recording a snare drum and you have a mic on the top of the snare as well as the bottom. When you hit a snare drum, the head of the drum is going to go in and essentially compress the air within the snare drum and then push the bottom head out. And then when that bottom head comes back in, it's going to do the exact opposite, where it compresses the air but then pushes the top head out. So kind of thinking about that, the top mic is going to get this wave, where the bottom mic is going to get this wave to start with. And what happens when you combine these two waves together, when they are exactly opposite of each other, you are essentially canceling them out. And this is really bad for drum sounds, or just really any sound in general when you're using two mics for a signal. So what you want to do is, if you flip the phase of the mic on the bottom or top, whichever one you choose, instead of having the waves kind of opposite, both waves are now going at the same they're in the same trajectory, I guess is the way to put it. But this will just make your snare sound a little bit fuller, but just stronger. So that's a useful thing for the phase flip button on the ASP. This is also super useful for, say, overheads, or if you're using two mics on just really any instrument, such as like a acoustic guitar or a piano or something. The next button we're going to go into is this roll-off. This is called your high-pass filter, low-cut filter. And all it's doing is it's going to roll off the signal at a certain point that you choose with the knob right below it. That says, so the reason this is important is, say you're recording a vocalist. Most of the time you're not going to need anything really below 100 hertz for a vocalist. So that's just going to get out any rumble, any low sub 100 hertz sounds. So say your artist is like tapping their foot and it's kind of shaking the mic stand, it's going to get out the sound of that mic stand shaking in the microphone. This is also super useful for live recordings. If you're recording a band live, you're not going to really want the sub bass in your singer's microphone. The mic will pick it up, but if you use this low cut, it's going to take out the sub bass and kind of just make your signal a little bit clearer. The only thing there is you do want to be careful. Once you cut it, you can't get it back. So I recommend really tuning it in before you actually record. Because again, once it's recorded, it's final. You can't put something back in it and you can't take stuff out for the most part. Our next button is this A to D, or A-D. Good way to describe this is, if you want to use any outboard gear, such as like a compressor or maybe like an effects unit going into the preamp of the ASP, you're going to have this button hit. It just kind of lets the ASP know that you're preemptively changing the signal before it hits the mic pre on the ASP, and it'll just make your signal a little bit better. So if you're using like an outboard preamp, such as like a Neve 1073 or something else, use that button and it's going to make your signal sound a little bit better. So our next thing that I want to go into is the impedance switch on the ASP. You get three options. You get medium, high, and low. And I want to go into why you're going to use one or the other of this, and mainly why you're actually just going to stick to the low impedance setting. So every single microphone has something called impedance. Anything using an alternating current will have impedance inherently. And a mic has something called the output impedance, and then any preamp, anything you're plugging your mic into is going to have something called a load impedance. So let's go into why you want to know what those two things are. So impedance is the resistance of an alternating current. Without going too deep into it, it's kind of what is going to control the flow of your signal from your microphone to your preamp. And just a couple quick notes on it. Most studio professional microphones, such as an SM58 or an SM57, and pretty much any condenser microphone, is going to have a low impedance output. I know this one's about 200 ohms. These are kind of around the same place, 150 to 200 ohms. Now, you don't really need to know what an ohm is or kind of why I'm bringing it up, other than the fact that when you have a high impedance going into a low impedance, or vice versa, low impedance going into a high impedance, you're going to need to know what happens when that occurs. So take a condenser microphone, and this one has a lower impedance, right? When you plug it into a preamp, you want to make sure that the impedance is somewhat matched. And low is generally below 600 ohms. Most preamps are going to kind of follow that same thing. High impedance is more like, I think on the ASP it's like 6,000 ohms. So with a microphone, you're going to generally want to match or bridge your impedance, which will be on the low setting here for your Z switch. Z is also another way to define impedance. You want to match because say you send a very low impedance signal from a microphone to something that's much higher, like a high impedance, what you're going to get is somewhat of a drop of signal. Not so much as the signal quality, but more just the actual volume of the signal, which will require you to turn the preamp up more and cause your signal to noise floor ratio to be a little off. You don't really want that kind of like humming white noise sound of the noise floor coming into your recording. So that's why you're going to want to go from a low impedance mic to a low impedance input, and this gives you the option to do that. Moving on from that, say you're recording DI, such as like a guitar just going straight into the Audient. Guitars and instrument cables are actually a little bit different in the sense that they produce a very high impedance signal. So you're going to want to actually switch this down to the high when you're actually plugging in directly to the ASP. If you're recording a guitar amp, you're not really going to need to know or mess with that. It's going to be the same for a microphone. Reasons that you'd plug directly into the Audient is maybe you're recording a bass guitar and you just want that DI signal, or whatever reason you want a DI signal for an electric guitar. So you want to match it there, so going from high impedance to high impedance. You do not want to go from high impedance to low impedance. The reason being is you're overloading the signal, essentially, so you're going to probably get some distortion in the recording. And worst case scenario, you might actually harm your preamp or whatever your interface is. So just make sure you're aware of that when you're going from a guitar directly into the ASP. So just another note on impedance and why it's important to know a little bit about. Again, no professional studio microphone is really going to be using super low or super high impedance because there's a lot of downsides to it. It's a little cheaper to make, but you're going to sacrifice a lot for that price. So a lot of the time they just stick to the low impedance. There are microphones that have a little bit higher, such as the Royer R121. It's a ribbon microphone. And it's interesting as they actually recommend going from its impedance level, which is around 600 ohms, into a little bit higher, like 1,500 ohms. So something I recommend is just look into your microphone. Most microphones will have their impedance spec'd on a spec sheet. You can just Google it really quick, type in the name of your microphone and impedance right after, and it's going to be one of the first few links that come up that will give you that information that you're looking for. So that's a little bit on the ASP, going a little deeper into it and kind of what you're going to want to be doing with these buttons. Worth kind of reading into each one, kind of learning a little bit more about why you're going to use a low pass or a high pass filter, or why you'd phase flip. Phase is extremely important and worth trying to get your head wrapped around before you start recording drums or something that's using a couple more mics than just one mic. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be having more videos come out shortly. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll answer those. Thank you so much, everyone.